Welcome everyone to the webinar labeled The Business Potential from Ecosystems or Dynamic Ecosystem with our guest star, John Hagel. I will just start by giving you a small introduction to the center. You're just attending a webinar arranged by the Rananhui Silicon Valley Center, and it was founded in 2020 with a quest of developing a new curriculum around management and management education. The focus is to provide you with a 360 degree of a digital mindset and ecosystem, and what John Hagel will call dynamic ecosystem is one of the absolutely identified key component or element of the new management model for the 21st century or for the digital age. So I'm glad that you could make it and that you could attend today. I hope you will like the content and the knowledge that you will get from this webinar. I want to remind you though that a webinar like this is only giving you a small piece of what you need to know in the area. So if you want to really get more hands-on skills and be able to do this yourself in your own organization later on, I would encourage you to take the course on dynamic ecosystem that will be offered on May 12th. And John Hagel will also offer a course on exponential leadership, which is another key component element of the digital age on March 24th. I will send the link to both of those courses now and then in the chat window. I already sent them, so you should have them in the beginning of the chat. If you cannot see that, I will resend them. I will also send later an article from about the situation in China and what is going on there. And you might have read, some of you, that maybe the country leading digital ecosystem right now and the involvement of that is China. So we have a great panel with us that will share their view and their expertise. First, of course, John Hagel, our lead instructor of both courses, Exponential Leadership, that he also have been teaching at other institutions. I might not be allowed to mention where. Am I, John? Can I mention that?
Sure.
Yeah, so you have been teaching at Singularity University and have been a very well-known lead instructor there. He also an expert and advisor to the World Economic Forum and to the Global Peter Drucker Forum. So I don't think we can find any more trustworthy and credible lead instructor for what we're talking about today. Then we have Marshall Meyer. Marshall Meyer is not only a professor emeritus from Wharton Business School, but has also been one of the first studying what's happening in China and has been developing an expertise in what Higher is doing in China and the ecosystem perspective and ecosystem model they have been building up. So we will learn from Marshall Meyer a little bit later. And then we have Viren Shah. We discussed if you say Viren or Viren.
Viren.
Viren, yeah. So it's my Swedish accent again. I'm so sorry. So Viren Shah he's from GEA, GE Appliances. He's the chief digital officer there, and he have been working with the transformation, the business transformation of that company for a number of years now. And right now you are in the middle of your development of ecosystem, and to go even further into the ecosystem phase, you even call it your ecosystem phase of your transformation. So welcome both, or all of you, not both, all three of you. And by that, I would like to start introducing John Hagel to the stage that will give you a small update on his perspective on what it means with ecosystem and dynamic ecosystem, why it's important, and also maybe give you some hint what you will learn in the course if you decide to take that later on. And he will also then engage Viren, sorry, Viren, in that conversation. So welcome to the stage, John.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Everyone today is talking about ecosystems in businesses and other organizational settings, but I think there's a significant potential that has not yet been addressed. And that's the focus of this webinar. And by the way, I'm going to be talking largely in the context of companies here, but I should indicate this perspective around ecosystems applies to all institutions, not just businesses and companies. But as context for the perspective, I'm going to make the comment that we are living in what I call a big shift world. There are long-term forces that are reshaping our global economy and society in profound ways. We're still in the early stages of this big shift, a lot more to come. But one of the impacts of the big shift is it's creating mounting performance pressure on all of us. It takes many different forms, competition's intensifying, pace of change accelerating, extreme disruptive events coming in from nowhere. It's a lot of pressure, and it's generating a lot of fear among leaders. And I think the emotion is understandable because of the pressure, but it has some very limiting effects. It leads to erosion of trust. It leads to a desire to tightly control everything. And as a result, I think we've had two trends in the ecosystem world. One is vertical integration. Many companies that previously were relying on suppliers are going in and either buying those suppliers or creating their own supply operations so they don't have to rely on others. They don't trust anyone else. Vertical integration. The other consequence is there's a tendency also for outsourcing to get short-term cost reduction, particularly in the developed economies in the West, a tendency to want to go out and find people and companies in developing economies with much lower wage rates where they can get the same operations performed at much lower cost. So those are two key drivers at this point in the ecosystem world. And I'd say that most of the ecosystems today in business focus on short-term transactions. It's all about, I need some resource, I got to do a short-term transaction to get access to that resource. And they're creating tightly managed supply chains. I emphasize the word chains because I think this is not an accident that these are called chains. They're binding everybody together in very tight ways that cannot be changed. Those are the supply chains. And we've seen some consequences of that in the current pandemic crisis globally, where the supply chains actually turn out to be relatively fragile. So I think in this context, I believe there are three levels of opportunity for ecosystems that have yet to be fully addressed. And they can be addressed by leveraging the growing connectivity that's being created globally by the big shift. We have so much more potential around ecosystems that is not being addressed. And so my goal here is to, at a very high level, outline the three levels of opportunity. There's a lot more detail here, but I will have to forego the detail, just give you a plain's eye view of the opportunities, and a lot more in the course ahead. But so the first level of opportunity is what I call leveraged growth. There's an opportunity to grow much more quickly with fewer resources with ecosystems. And I think it's interesting. I work with a lot of leaders of large companies, and they're under increasing pressure for growth from their investors. The investors don't just want profits, they want growth. And when the discussion turns to growth strategy, it's all about two options: make or buy. Those are the two options we have. How much are we going to do with each? What's missing is a third option, which is leveraged growth. How can we mobilize more and more third parties to add value to our customers and capture some of that value for ourselves along the way? can do that with far less resource, far more quickly than either make or buy. But it's generally missing from the conversation. And it requires a shift in focus from cost to value. When we look at ecosystems, are we looking at just reducing cost, or are we looking at increasing value that's delivered to the customers? Leveraged growth requires us to focus on increasing value to the customers. But to do that, we need to look ahead and really anticipate the large emerging unmet needs of customers and other stakeholders. What are those needs that we can start to mobilize third parties to address? And I won't go, again, I can't go into detail on how this is all done, but I'll just quickly mention an example of a company that did this in an interesting way. It's Cisco in the electronics industry, networking industry. They found that as they were growing, they found that more and more of their customers were going to them through intermediaries, and that they actually were losing any contact with their end customer. And what they ended up doing was they created a website online called Cisco Connection Online. They launched it in the 1990s. And the goal there was they invited people who were interested in their products to come to this website. They asked a few questions. They started to give answers back that was helpful to the customers, more questions, and they got to know more and more about the needs of the customers. And then they started to connect the customers to third parties who could be more helpful to them in terms of addressing their need. Maybe they needed some consulting help. Maybe they needed some site preparation help in their facility. Whatever it was, they could connect. And they ended up creating an ecosystem of 40,000 participants and huge value to their customers, because whatever the customer needs were, Cisco could become the organizer to connect them with the appropriate resources or expertise. So I think it's an interesting example of leveraged growth. Cisco was able to drive significant growth because they were providing more and more value back to the customers and collecting commissions and fees for helping to make those connections. So that's the first level of opportunity, leveraged growth. Now, before I go into the other two levels of opportunity, I want to just invite Viren Shah to briefly share some perspectives on ecosystems. As Anika mentioned, he's the Chief Digital Officer of GE Appliances and now part of Meyer, the global Chinese appliance company. So Viren, please.
Now, thank you, John. I think I would just tee off to what you just shared. The way we are looking at ecosystem growth, of course, just the simplest way to think about it is, for a very long time, we were a hardware company, as in our appliances. I don't take any credit for that because there are very smart people before me who have been making our appliances connected for almost 8 to 10 years now. And over time, we have built additional capabilities of software and service in our portfolio. So truly now we were becoming a hardware, software, and service company. And that's kind of our play in the digital world, to be an ecosystem company. And to me, that is one of the biggest aspects that you talked about is we are building a lot of capabilities in our portfolio. We are just finding new ways of leveraging them. One of the ways we are thinking about it is how do we partner? And by the way, this is an open invitation to anybody on this call. Is if you imagine we sell cooktops or ovens. Well, technically, what we are selling is a way to cook and make food, but most importantly, dinner is an event where memories are created. And the unmet need, just like you mentioned, for people is it takes a lot of friction to manage that event appropriately, buy the groceries, make sure they arrive on time, they are fresh, have the recipe, make sure the food gets cooked in time so we can have a beautiful, memorable dinner with the people we love. So we are attempting to work with many other companies because the unmet need is there is a lot of friction that goes through to create these amazing memories. And how can we leverage, just to your point, take our capabilities, take other organizational capabilities who play in this event, could be a food retailer, could be a company that just manages water, could be a channel where the recipe is being streamed, right? But how do we work with all these people? Because a combination of these capabilities with least amount of resources can be allowing us to grow exponentially, but most importantly in segments and markets that is not core to what we do every day. So that's kind of our mindset, because we wanted to be the largest appliance company in United States. And now we have shifted to say we want to be the leading ecosystem appliance company in the United States. And this is again part of all the different things we learn just like from our higher headquarters, where some of the courses you all talk about, where how do you co-create? So this is a co-creation opportunity. There are many other examples. For example, say GEA created something called as a first build platform, just to your Cisco analogy, where our product innovation came from a very crowd event where people are allowed and given a platform to come and innovate. And then if it makes sense, then it becomes part of the mainstream. So I truly believe there are many examples that we learn from you as part of the courses you all teach to play in this ecosystem.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That's a great example of how ecosystems can be used to drive change and growth. So thank you.
No, thank you.
So I talked about the first level of opportunity in ecosystems, untapped opportunity, which is this notion of leveraged growth, how to grow faster with fewer resources and create more value. There's a second level of opportunity, which has to do with enhancing the flexibility and scaling the impact of the participants in an ecosystem. And here, I think one of the key barriers to scaling ecosystems are the tightly coupled business processes that large companies tend to run around the world. And if you have tightly coupled business processes, it requires a lot of supervision and management of any other third parties that you're going to be involved with, because every task has to be done to the very great detail. The opportunity here is to shift to a very different form of business process management, loosely coupled business processes that can be orchestrated. And what I mean by loosely coupled, it's thinking about business processes as modular sets of activities, where you focus, your primary focus is what's the module, what's the input, what's the output, and then whatever goes on within the module is up to the participant. You don't specify every activity that needs to be done. And so if you can go to that modular kind of business process, it allows you to scale because you have much less administrative overhead required to manage large numbers of third parties in your ecosystem. It's also not just an opportunity to add more participants, but it's also can become a seedbed for innovation. Because now any participant, as long as they focus on what's coming into them and what they need to produce at the other end, they can innovate in terms of how to do that activity within their business, within their company. And innovation can be decentralized out to the individual participants. So it's a big untapped opportunity, but again, it requires shifting from tightly integrated business processes to much more modular business processes that can include a much broader range of participants. And I'll just quickly mention one of the companies, as you'll see, there's a theme here that China has been kind of at the leading edge of a lot of the ecosystem opportunities. There's a company in China called Li and Feng. They're in the clothing and apparel business, but they ended up creating a global ecosystem of over 15,000 business participants. And it spanned across 40 different countries. It wasn't just China, 40 different countries in every continent in the world. But they grew this ecosystem to serve their customers who were apparel designers in the West, the brand names that we all know and love. They were orchestrating and organizing all the activities from sourcing of raw materials through all the stages of production, all the logistics to get it to the apparel designer or the retailer, wherever they were. Major set of value delivered to their customers, the apparel designers. And it enabled them to grow more than 10x in the 1990s. They grew tenfold in the 1990s to, at that point, $4 billion in US dollars in revenue. And they were generating over $1 million per employee. Now you talk about leverage, that's pretty impressive, over $1 million per employee. And they earned a 30 to 50% return on equity, which in the clothing and apparel industry was unheard of. Razor thin margins were the dominant aspect of the apparel industry. So I use this as an example of the success of really, and a key to their success was they adopted this modular business process approach. They defined the modules and they left it up to the participants to figure out how they were going to produce what they needed within the module so it could be delivered to the next participant. The caution here is that they also encountered growing challenges in the next 2 decades after the 1990s, in the 2000 and beyond. They shifted back to an acquisition-driven growth strategy. They ended up buying a lot of companies, more and more companies, and they created competitors with their ecosystem participants. Long story short, it created significant challenges for them. So I think it illustrates that it's hard to do both. You know, if you're going to do ecosystem growth through ecosystems, be careful about buying companies who are participating in that ecosystem, because now you're creating competitors to the participants in the ecosystem. So both success story and challenges to be learned from there. So that's the second level of opportunity, is really coming up with more modular business processes that can create much more flexibility and allow companies to scale ecosystems at a dramatically higher level. Let me just get now to the third level of opportunity. There's still more to come here, and it's ultimately the biggest untapped opportunity, I believe, in ecosystems, which is how to accelerate impact within the ecosystem. How do you get exponential improvement in impact within an ecosystem? And here, I've come to propose that we need to move from what I call static ecosystem models to dynamic ecosystem models. What I mean here is the mindset that most companies have when they go out and build an ecosystem is it's a static view. You know, I know this company has some resources or skills that I need to access, so let's do a transaction, access the skills, but they're fixed skills. We know what the resources are. It's static. We need to just connect to them. Dynamic ecosystems say no. The big opportunity is to recognize that everyone participating in the ecosystem has the potential to significantly increase their performance over time. And how can we create an ecosystem that will encourage them and make it possible for every participant to accelerate their performance and improvement? That, I believe, requires the development of something that I've come to call learning platforms as the foundation for these dynamic ecosystems. But here I need to clarify too, when I talk about learning platforms, I'm talking about learning in the form of creating new knowledge, not just sharing existing knowledge. And I think the distinction is important in the sense that I'm not talking about online video courses or training programs. I'm talking about platforms that will help participants to come together, face unforeseen challenges or opportunities, and find creative ways to address those, and in the process create entirely new knowledge that did not exist before. How would we do that? What is required for that kind of learning platform? And it starts with the notion that the core design principle of the learning platform needs to be the goal of helping to accelerate the creation of new knowledge by all the participants, not just sharing existing knowledge. So it's complicated. Again, there are very few examples of these kind of learning platforms that exist, but if we can harness that potential to learn faster by creating new knowledge and accelerate performance improvement, we take the network effects that come with any ecosystem, even static ecosystems where you get more and more value because there are more and more participants. Now you're taking a second level of exponential impact because every participant is creating more and more value more quickly because they've participated in these learning platforms. And a key, I'll just mention a key issue in terms of these kinds of dynamic ecosystems is focusing on the motivation of the participants. Because as I mentioned at the outset, we're in a big shift world where fear is the dominant emotion. And I think with fear can certainly motivate some learning, but it's never going to motivate the kind of learning that you can have if you have excitement about the opportunity to create more and more value. And that requires a very specific form of passion. I won't go into detail here, but I call it the passion of the explorer. And a key goal in terms of designing these dynamic ecosystems to accelerate impact is how do we cultivate that sense of passion among the participants so they're driven to learn faster together and they're constantly trying to get to the next level of impact. So in this context, again, I'll go back to China as for my example. This is again back into the mid-1990s in a city in China that many Westerners don't even know about, but it's quite large and quite prosperous, called Chongqing. Chongqing, back in the mid-1990s, was the site where a number of entrepreneurs came together to create motorcycle companies. And their goal was to challenge the dominant motorcycle companies in the world, who at the time were Japanese companies. And they were, companies like Zhongshan, Longshin, Dachangjiang. There are a number of companies like that started up. And interesting thing was they took the motorcycle design that when the Japanese were designing motorcycles was a tightly integrated design. Everything was tightly integrated in the motorcycle. And they ended up creating a modular design for motorcycles so that you could focus on specific parts of the motorcycle, improve the performance of that, and connect it into the other parts of the motorcycle much more easily. Long story short, they created an ecosystem where they brought together leading companies in the various technologies required for motorcycles and encouraged them to innovate around the modules that their technology addressed. And then every 6 months, they would bring those modules to the best of the performance of the modules together and release a new motorcycle. using those modules. Well, again, I can't go into all the detail, but the average export price of a motorcycle from these companies dropped from about $700 in the late 1990s to less than $200 in 2002. A significant reduction in price and the same or higher level of performance. They weren't sacrificing on the performance of the motorcycle, same or higher level of performance at a much lower price. And it created an opportunity for them to significantly increase their market share, not just in China, but around the world relative to the Japanese. So I think it's an early example of the opportunity around learning platforms, where if we focus on bringing participants together so that they can learn faster in coming up with higher and higher levels of performance, you can accomplish some pretty amazing things. So I just want to emphasize, I've gone at a very high level through all of this, and it's not just about the opportunities and the concepts that I'm focused on. The class that I'll be offering on ecosystems in May is going to go into much more detail on what's required to implement these approaches. So it's not just coming up with a great new idea, but it's how do you go about implementing it so you get the results that are available. And I'll also indicate, I've talked about ecosystems at a very high level that more or less focuses on leaders of large companies and institutions and the opportunity for them. I believe that the ecosystem opportunities are not just for the leaders at the top of the organization, but that there are opportunities at the departmental level. If you're in a department in a large company, you can create ecosystems that can create significant value. Even at the level of individuals, I think this whole notion of learning platforms becomes hugely valuable to all individuals in a company who are facing mounting performance pressure and need to learn faster together. So the course, obviously, it covers 3 days, 4 hours each day, a lot more time than we've had available in the webinar today. But you can tell I'm passionate about this. And one of the reasons I'm passionate is because I go back to the big shift in my starting point about mounting performance pressure. The paradox is at the same time that it's creating mounting performance pressure, the forces that are driving the big shift are creating exponentially expanding opportunity. We can create far more value with far less resource, far more quickly than would have ever been imaginable a few decades ago because of all the connectivity that's now available. But that requires harnessing the potential that I've talked about in terms of these untapped opportunities for ecosystems. And again, just to put it into context, this is part of a much bigger shift. It's not just about shifting our view of ecosystems. The big shift that I'm talking about are going to require a fundamentally different approach to leadership in general in companies. So it's going to require us to change our view of strategy, our view of organization, our view of operations. And fortunately, I have another class that's focused on leadership for exponential impact, which goes into much more detail about this broader need for change and how that can be accomplished. It's not, again, not just the ecosystems, but the ecosystems become a key component to it. So with that, let me just turn it back to Anika and we'll continue.
Thank you. So we have got a number of questions. We will await with answering those questions until later. We have a Q&A. I just want to emphasize, I myself have been, having this quest for 3 decades now, almost 30 years, trying to understand the new management model of the new economy. And I've been, of course, then personally taking John's courses and sitting with him the 12 hours. And it's absolutely mind-blowing. Even if I've been doing research and have been a researcher for almost 30 years, I was like, oh my God, that is, how it all, hang together. And I got all those insights. So I think it's definitely worthwhile taking the courses. Another one that is absolutely mind-blowing is Marshall Meyer's work on hire. Me personally, I met Hire in 2016, pretty late. Marshall met them earlier than that. And Hire is more or less disrupting everything as we know it. So you can just imagine, based on what John just told you, how not only the leader's role would change, but also R&D's role would change, marketing, customer service, sales roles would change. And then, of course, how do you build those ecosystem up? How do you orchestrate them? How do you, as one of the questions was, how do you keep and protect your values, your identity, make sure that you keep your flexibility if you're part of those ecosystem? And Hire is not, they are not talking about self-organized ecosystem. No, that is not enough. It's self-evolving. So it's part of this learning platform, as John mentioned. So over to Marshall Meyer, that has been spending, I don't know how many years of, trying to understand Hire's way of working with ecosystem, because it's complex. It's really hard to understand if you never have seen it, because they think differently. They use other concepts than we do. And it's a pretty complex learning process that Marshall and John and myself and some others in the world translate for you so you can actually better understand it. So Marshall, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Annika. John, thank you for your comments. It's a privilege to be here. Annika, I noticed the clock in your background hasn't moved. My background is real. It's not a Zoom stock tropical scene. I'm on the beach on the west coast of Florida right now. So I hope people will forgive any background noises. They come with the territory. Yeah, I appreciate that introduction. I've known Hire for a while, in great depth now for over 20 years. CEO John invited me to Hire, I think in 2001, and it was an eye opener. And every time I get there, it is a further eye opener. Obviously, I've not been there since, to tell you exactly, January 17th, 2020. So we hope that on many fronts, we're able to have better interchange with China. There is a lot of learning to be done there. So I'm going to start. I know I only have a couple of minutes here, but I want to start with a little mystery. Annika, did you circulate that link I just gave you?
I will send that out now.
It was sent out. Okay. So it's in this morning's edition of Nikkei Asia. And what does it say? It says, here's the headline: Chinese home appliance makers focus on diversification. And it's a short article, and it says basically, hey, appliance sales are contracting a little bit with the contraction in the real estate market. A lot of appliance sales in China, much higher percentage are new homes than in the US. I think in the US, new homes only account for 10, 15% of appliance sales, 75, 85% replacement. China, it's not the reverse, but much higher proportion in new home sales. But anyway, sales are contracting. Appliance makers are, quote, diversifying, right? Classic organizational play. And there's a lot of discussion here of Hire diversifying into the laundry business. And it talks about Mr. Clear. If I'd had time, I would have given you a slide and shown you the logos and the images and so on, but I don't have time to do that. and how Mr. Clear will do your laundry, will in fact come to your home and sterilize your refrigerator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Perfect example of seeing the world through familiar rather than unfamiliar lenses. Mr. Clear, in fact, is one of the cornerstones of Hire's ecosystem strategy. And when we get to the real course, when I've got a few more minutes in this, I don't know how much time I have in the courses, but it's not a lot, I know. I'll be able to explain this to you in some detail. So a couple of general things. The term ecosystem to me as an academic covers a lot of territory. It could almost be something as simple as a brand. Why is that? Because a powerful brand organizes for the customer, not only your point of purchase, your point of service, your physical coordination of appliances, say in a kitchen, and your general confidence in the maker of that appliance. And by the way, Hire is extraordinarily good at branding. Almost all US companies, all companies in the world, should look at how they created the Casarti brand, which today is about a 75% share in the high-end appliance market in China. And where Viren's still on with us, he might be able to say to us that the profit margins in luxury appliances are much, much higher than in mid-market appliances. A second thing, so what John was talking about, you create an ecosystem by getting cooperation among lots of companies. There's a good literature about it. We could go through that literature. We had longer time, but there's not time to do that. Typical literature, John is extremely familiar with this, I know, says you've got to have an orchestrator and then you've got contributors, but somehow there's got to be a centroid to the larger ecosystems. Now, and Hire's attempting to play this role in China. At a third level, we have to think about communication and control. Platforms, physical platforms, where at least in the appliance business, multiple appliances are under command and control of a single device owned by the user. This is a rapidly growing market. The statistics are fairly mind-blowing. And here's where Hire, in fact, has a bit of a challenge. Why is that? Xiaomi, the phone company, got an early lead in this market, and their Mi.com app now coordinates with many, many different appliances. Hire's response, by the way, is partly to rename the company. In China, it's called Hire Smart Home. And it's partly to rename its operating units as well. So your washing machine business, which I know little about, is now called the Internet of Clothing. Refrigeration business is part of the Internet of Food. Again, more of that when there's more time. But it's the next level where I really like to take you. And this is at the level where your ecosystem consists not just of cooperation between people, cooperation between companies, co-branding, etc., but it consists of communication between things, between objects. It is the world of the Internet of Things, where all of the systems, for example, in your house, not only talk to you, but they talk to each other. And they also talk to systems outside the house. So let's go back to this kind of mystery of Mr. Clear. What does Mr. Clear, Hire's Laundry, have to do with their ecosystem and this Internet of Things? Here's a partial, very succinct answer, because I want to leave a little mystery here so you come back. The partial answer is this. Your clothes go to Mr. Clear. It's very inexpensive and it's very convenient. That makes your life easy. But when your clothes go to Mr. Clear, They put a tag on it. And that tag currently, I think, is an RFID tag, miniature RFID tag. They track your clothes. And in China, everybody wants their clothes washed separately from everyone else's, by the way. They track your clothes. They're sure to get them back to you promptly, etc. Your smart closet at home made by Hire knows where your clothes are. Your washing machine knows how often those clothes have been laundered, their likely shelf life, with protection for consumer privacy, which is a big deal in China because China's essentially adopted European consumer data protection laws. With privacy in place, the makers of clothes learn in the aggregate how their clothes are being used. So the end game here, which is very difficult to achieve, and we're going to talk about some of those challenges, is an ecosystem that goes from the design of clothing, often by the consumer himself, herself, to the manufacture, distribution, utilization, care, and ultimately the recycling of clothing. That's one huge ecosystem. It's centered on clothing, not appliances. Interesting. Okay, more to come on this. It's very complex. As Anika said, it's not easy to understand. Look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks.
Fantastic. And with that, we are opening up for questions. Just to make it more easy for me, could you send your questions in the Q&A so we can split general comments from questions. I do know I can start with one question that I got, and it was about how do you protect your own flexibility and your own values. And this is from Radhakiran Mai. He say, my question is, as we know, ecosystem is a secret source financial sustainability. How can we make sure that we protect our core values and be flexible to variety of partners, and how ecosystem can be seen from the eyes of end users? So, one is how do we keep our sort of independency and our flexibility and our own values, and how can ecosystem be seen from an end user perspective? John, would you like to comment on that quickly?
Yeah, I'm not sure the questions. How customers view ecosystems, I think if properly done, they view them as a significant source of value, that somebody is connecting them with whatever expertise is necessary at the time, and not necessarily that one company's expertise, but whoever has it. And so I think it creates much more loyalty and much more sense of being helped than a company that says, whatever your needs are, I can handle them, no problem. So I think that it helps to build trust and deeper relationships with clients. So, yeah.
Okay, so we have another one. Are there recommended thoughts, resources, newsletter, as well on the role of conversational AI and data visualization? That is, maybe could you specify that question a bit? The ecosystem is usually based on AI. It's enabling. I mean, both big data analytics, AI are used as enabling technologies, but the focus here is not specifically on AI as such.
I'll just, let me just jump in the sense that I think clearly, excuse me, I mentioned the connectivity that is increasingly available that can support the growth of very diverse and large-scale ecosystems. A key part of that connectivity, as I think Marshall mentioned, is not just connecting people with each other, it's connecting things with each other. So we have real-time view of what is happening in relevant context, and we can deliver more tailored value to the specific client as a result. So conversational AI and all the technologies around capturing the data and providing real-time visibility to all the participants of whatever context is relevant to them is a huge value to accelerating learning. We have much more rapid feedback loops. And again, that's a whole other topic. I don't want to go into great detail here. I do also want to mention, somebody asked, if I could just rephrase the 3 levels of ecosystems, or opportunity around ecosystems. I wanted to be sure everybody at least captures that as the core framework for how to think about ecosystem and opportunity. The first level of impact of untapped opportunity is around leveraged growth. It's how can companies grow much more quickly with far less resources by harnessing the potential of ecosystems. So that's the first level of untapped opportunity. The second level of opportunity is how do we increase the flexibility of that ecosystem so that we can be more responsive to specific needs of specific customers in a rapidly changing world. And that gets into the whole notion of modular business processes. But that's the second level, is just increased flexibility so you can scale more. And then finally, the third level, and I think the biggest level of untapped opportunity, is around accelerating impact through learning platforms. How can we focus our ecosystem design on helping all participants to learn faster and accelerate their performance impact? So I think those are the 3 levels. And
yeah, we actually have a question about that. Say more about learning platforms and provide another examples. And here it might also be, Marshall, if you want to mention shortly about how for example, the Internet of Clothing ecosystem of Hire, how they actually co-create and learn and develop over time. But John, maybe you first.
Yeah, I mean, there are not many good examples, in my view, of learning platforms yet, where the primary design goal is learning. And again, it's not learning in the form of training programs. The learning platforms I'm talking about are helping people to address unseen situations that have never been seen before, and through action, figuring out how to have more impact in that context. And again, not enough time, but a key element in these learning platforms of creating new knowledge is bringing small groups of people together so that they can help each other see the opportunities and challenges that haven't been seen before, and develop actions to have impact against them. So, yeah.
So Marshall, have you seen how they actually do that? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. And let's go back to Hire. Rendan Huyi did not start with ecosystems. It rather started with something they originally called ZZJYT, and then they called them Shaways, small team-based organization. Before they got to ecosystem, they split the company into very, very small working teams. Were held really their feet were held to the fire for performance. They were incredibly competitive, but it triggered a lot of creativity. Quite frankly, some of it went in the wrong direction. I can tell stories about that later, but a lot of it went in the right direction. And so ecosystem per se, I think, required this fundamental form of organization, or at least of thinking about organization, to be in place. And so in some sense, I think the learning platforms might have been there before the ecosystem.
Okay, and we also know that one part of their learning is that they write something they called EMC contracts. So they have contracts between the partners that is acting as both as a controlling mechanism, what you're focusing on, but it's also dynamic. So it's changing and can change over time. And the philosophy and the culture, the value is always to create increasingly value for the users. So that is sort of the North Star. But we will get into details about that in the course. Niklas, you asked, which are the first starting steps if you want to build an ecosystem? And I think this is for someone that is not working in this way today. I mean, my own research show that it might take a number of years in order for that for ecosystem to start, and even then it might not be connected with the company strategy. And for me, that is really strange. If you want to go for an ecosystem approach, in my view, it has to be part of your company and corporate strategy. This is your way of working, both to the end users and also with innovation. And in that, if you choose that strategy, how could you start that process, John?
Well, again, I don't want to suggest this is easy. It's very challenging. In my experience working with companies in this area, a key notion is the concept of staging. It's not trying to create the massive ecosystem for everyone all at once.
No.
It's finding some significant unmet need on the part of your customers that could be addressed by connecting with just a few other participants, and learning how to manage those relationships, how to build those relationships and manage them so that both sides are benefiting from it and the customers benefiting from it. And so it's learning through staging and the feedback loops. I think the biggest problem with ecosystems is companies get too excited about it and they want to do it all at once.
Yeah.
And the thing just collapses.
So start small, experiment, learn while you're running, feedback loops, and identify one objective, one key value that might not be met and that you can meet in this new form. I think with this, I need to thank our panelists. I need to thank you because the time is out. I hope you got some nuggets in this space and in this knowledge area. I hope you are excited as we are. We hope to see you in other webinars coming up, and also, of course, in any of the courses. I just shared a discount code that you can use. So everyone that attended today will get a 20% discount if you want to sign up for anything. Thank you for now, and see you in the future. And thank you, John. Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you. It's great.